In early June, Kotaku's Jason Schreier detailed Andromeda's troubled 5-year development cycle, which led to a lot of issues for the final product. A few days ago, he followed up by reporting that the game will not get single-player DLC. Hey guys, JV here, sharing my thoughts on Kotaku's latest Mass Effect story. As always, if you like what I do here and want to see more, be sure to subscribe. So, plain and simple, according to this Kotaku article, Andromeda will not receive any single-player DLC. This is according to 3 anonymous sources familiar with BioWare's plans. Before we go further, I want to take a moment to explain why I take a report like this seriously, because some people will write off something like this immediately when they see anonymous sources, as to suggest that this guy, Jason Schreier, made it all up. I've also seen comments like, wait for an executive at EA or BioWare to come out and comment on this, as if they're suddenly going to change their tune and be upfront and honest about this game. Could be faulty logic, blinding fandom, people truly don't understand the situation, or something else entirely, but here's why I believe it's a good idea to trust this story. I don't know Jason Schreier personally, never interacted with this person, but I do know of him. He's a journalist who's reported these kinds of stories for several years now. Big examples include leaking Fallout 4's script and story the very beginning of the game back in 2013, 2 years before the game even came out and before it was even announced. He was the one who detailed how Destiny's story at Bungie was changed late in development because the lead writer left or something along those lines, and of course more recently reported on Andromeda's development cycle and how bad the last 5 years have been internally. So, say what you want about ethical standards in journalism, but this guy, Jason Schreier, has been notoriously accurate with these kinds of reports. He's right. He's not making this stuff up. You don't just make up fake sources, lie about troubled development cycles, and still have people take you seriously. Like any journalist that isn't working for a tabloid magazine that you'll find at the grocery store, this stuff involves credibility and reputation, and I think this guy, Jason, would be in seriously hot water if this was all made up. My point is, it's foolish to dismiss this report because of anonymous sources. Healthy skepticism is good, but don't pretend this is not legitimate. We know who it's coming from, where it's coming from, and this guy has a really good track record. We should absolutely be paying attention to this and treating it as if it's legitimate and real. Back to the Kotaku article, he mentions BioWare scaled down its Montreal studio who worked on Andromeda. We know that, and this scaling down happened earlier this year. They transferred employees to work on Battlefront 2, Anthem, and Dragon Age, different EA IPs. We know that a small team remains at Montreal to work on multiplayer for Andromeda and patch support, some promises that BioWare made to improve the game and make it in an acceptable state. And of course, we also know that BioWare can still make money on multiplayer loot boxes. Because so many people have been shifted around, there are few people left at Montreal who could even work on single-player DLC. And so unless BioWare makes a serious change of plans and a pivot, it's just not coming at this point. He also references back to an earlier report that BioWare has shelved plans for a sequel to Andromeda and confirms that BioWare has refused to talk about this publicly and refused to comment on any of the reports on Kotaku. So that's what the story says, and this is my take. I believe that this is yet another step in this evolving story about Andromeda's critical failure in the minds of the general public. Keep in mind I said general public. As I've shared personally, I think it's a good game, not a great one, but the gaming community at large, and a lot of the Mass Effect community at this point, doesn't feel the same. They don't even think it's a good game. Recently, I shared my pleasant experience playing the game a second time on PC, the best platform to play it on, right, graphically and everything else in between. I had no issues playing through, but I ignored all of the side stuff and went for the main story, had a shorter playthrough, but had a better time with the game. That being said, it came nowhere close to the original trilogy. Like I said, I'm not going to touch the game again unless we have new content, and that's very strange for me because I played the original trilogy through at least 5 times. At this point, I'm starting to feel apathetic about the whole thing. Any kind of Mass Effect Andromeda news is not good, and it hasn't ever been. I don't know how much worse this could get, honestly. It's like watching a dumpster fire spread and only get bigger. If for some reason Jason Schreier is incorrect and we get blindsided with single-player DLC, I would be genuinely shocked. The fact remains we haven't gotten a single piece of good news from BioWare since the game came out. If we're being completely honest with ourselves, they've been mostly silent, not willing to comment on anything, but when they've actually come out and talked, it's been a lot of backtracking, apologizing, and promising to fix things that should have been fixed on launch. If you're out there and you're still someone who is holding out and hoping for a miracle, here's the only thread left that I can see, and it's very thin. The last few major BioWare games, I would say, are Mass Effect 3 and Dragon Age Inquisition before Andromeda, and the DLC for those games took several months to release after launch, and BioWare took their time to actually announce them. Just to put a time on these, the first DLC for Mass Effect 3, Leviathan, took almost 8 months to come out after release. Very long time, right? And then the first DLC for Inquisition, Jaws of Hakan, took over 4 months to come out. As I'm recording and uploading this video, it's been nearly 3.5 months from the time that Andromeda came out. So we are reaching that several months range of when DLC possibly could come out. But once again, what's really interesting is the time frame between when the DLC is released and when it's announced, because it's very interesting. So here are BioWare's last 6 pieces of single-player DLC, again across Mass Effect 3 and Dragon Age Inquisition, their announced date to launch date. Mass Effect 3's Leviathan DLC was announced about 3.5 weeks before it was released. The Omega DLC was announced 5.5 weeks before it was released. And then finally, the Citadel DLC for Mass Effect 3 was announced 10 days before it was released. This was all happening in the latter half of 2012 and into 2013, and Citadel finally released a full year after Mass Effect 3 came out. Moving to Dragon Age Inquisition, which again came out in late 2014. So the first DLC, Jaws of Hakan, was announced the day before it was released. Literally, the day before, and the DLC was available right after. Blindsided people. Honestly, this really never happens, and so I was pretty surprised to read that. The next single-player DLC, called The Descent, was announced 6 days before it was released. And then the final single-player DLC for Inquisition was Trespasser, that was announced 10 days before it was released. So of these two games, obviously Inquisition is a better indicator of what we could expect with Andromeda DLC. It was released much more recently, right? That makes sense. And also it was made with Frostbite, same engine, and they had more experience, even though it didn't seem to help with Andromeda. Not to mention, we know that these development cycles overlapped, and that Montreal, this was their studio's first, full major release. And while Inquisition was made and released 3 years earlier, 2.5 years earlier, some developers did come to work on Andromeda after Inquisition, but it's by no means the same exact team. And the biggest distinction for me is that Mass Effect 3 and Dragon Age Inquisition were both much more well received than Andromeda, critically, in the general public, and from fans of these respective series. Now, I think there is a comparison to be made between Mass Effect 3's ending outrage and the pitchfork bandwagon surrounding Andromeda. At least from what I remember, it was a popular meme, if you will, to put Mass Effect 3's ending sucked on random videos on YouTube. It didn't matter what the video was about, that was a thing that spread around. And in a very similar fashion to the "my face is tired" or Andromeda's facial animations suck, very similar. But again, Mass Effect 3 got better reviews, and also there was a general understanding that the entire rest of Mass Effect 3 was good. People enjoyed it. It was great. It deserved whatever rating it got. People were just harping on the very end, of course. And finally, for Mass Effect 3 and Dragon Age Inquisition, neither time did we see the series as being put on ice, or the studio is being downsized and employees are being shifted to other studios right after release. That happened very shortly after Andromeda came out. So all of the controversy surrounding Mass Effect Andromeda is truly unique, even to BioWare themselves, and so it's very hard to translate to another game. I've said I was skeptical that single-player DLC would even come out for Andromeda after some of these things happening shortly after launch, and I'll never say never because I don't know for sure, but I just don't see single-player DLC happening for Andromeda at this point. I just don't see it happening. Finally, if you're wondering about the possibility of BioWare outsourcing the DLC to another studio to handle it since they don't have enough people at Montreal, the game's producer, one of the producers, Fernando Melo, confirmed that BioWare builds their own DLC and patches in-house within BioWare, which again begs the question, who would make the DLC for Andromeda? Where are the people? If there's a skeleton crew at Montreal that's only working on patches and DLC for multiplayer, then who would make it? We don't know. And if you missed it, this information comes after he exposed a fake studio that claimed to have BioWare cancel their work on DLC for the game, but that again turns out to be completely faked. It never happened. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below, whether you're holding a pitchfork or you're still a loyal, passionate fan of the series. Are you holding out for Andromeda DLC? Are you still hoping on it, or have you given up entirely? Let me know what you're thinking in the comment section below. If you're still watching and you enjoy the video, click the like button and subscribe for more content like this. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook so you don't miss another video. Sign up with Juniper to receive exclusive discounts on shirts, hoodies, and more at the JV merch store. Click the link in the description below for more details. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.